Hello there, people, and welcome to another episode of Flight Review. My name is Ray. Thank you so much for joining me, and it is with my great pleasure that finally, after 9 long years of waiting, I get to talk to you about the third Captain America solo film. Because we haven't had 3 Captain America solo films until now. For those of you that have been listening to my show and to anything Flightcast involved for the last 9 years, you know what I'm talking about. You know exactly where that shot was directed. Yes, I am here to talk about Captain America Brave New World. I have some spoiler-filled conversation I need to have with respect to this film. And I've gone back and forth with respect to whether or not I do these reviews spoiler-free or spoiler-filled. I know for the last, year or so, I've been doing them spoiler-free, and then I've said we will have the spoiler-filled conversation in Flight Chat, which, by the way, programming note, just want to let everybody know that Flight Chat, the very next episode of Flight Chat that was supposed to be due out today, postponed for another week. Reason? I had to work today. I actually was at work today. I was collecting a check today. That was a little unexpected, but not completely out of the ordinary, if you will. So yeah, delayed for a bit of a week, so anybody that hasn't gotten their emails in just yet, you have another week to get your feedback in, and I imagine a decent amount of you probably want to talk about this movie. And we can have spoiler-filled chats as well, but there's some things that go on in this movie that I definitely wish to have a spoiler-filled conversation about, to be honest with you. And especially when it comes to the conversation surrounding Marvel Cinematic Universe movies now. And it is very intriguing how we've come full circle in terms of how those movies are regarded now, as opposed to how they were regarded for a pretty long time throughout its, 16, almost 17 years of existence, if you will, 2008. All the way back to 2008 when the first Iron Man movie came out. That's the beginning of the MCU. And now things are in a really different position as far as how people and critics are regarding the franchise, but maybe not so different in terms of how the general audience is responding to it. We'll get into that here in a little bit, but before diving in headfirst into the spoiler-filled review of Captain America Brave New World, of course, I want to remind everybody listening to this show, if you are indeed a first-time listener, or if you're a long-time listener and you just need a reminder, you can find this show and all of my other shows at theflightcast.com or wherever you get your podcast. This show is available on Apple Podcasts. It's available on YouTube, on the Flightcast YouTube channel. It's also available on Spotify and Pandora as well. Just look up the Flightcast, look up Flightcast or the Flightcast, and you'll be able to find this particular show and all of its new episodes when they are releasing, like this one, or new episodes of the main show, or Flight Chat when that does happen. And at some point, I'll get back into TV reviews, of course, because there's a lot of TV to watch as well. But I also want to take a moment to thank all of the supporters of patreon.com/theflightcast. Thank you so much for your loyal support. Hope that you have been enjoying the bonus content that is there, and I keep saying that there is more to come, and I keep trying to get my schedule out of whack so that I can add more content to it. So no more empty promises. Just stay tuned for new content when it pops up. But thank you so much for your support. Thank you so much for being subscribers, very loyal to patreon.com/theflightcast. All right, let's get into it. Captain America Brave New World. This is our first Marvel Cinematic Universe offering of 2025, but it is the 35th, that's right, the 35th Marvel Cinematic Universe movie since 2008. Can you believe that? No, it's insane what this franchise has done as far as volume is concerned. And yeah, I meant everything that I said in the opening. I'm the one that has said for the longest time, and again, longtime listeners, Anthony, Phil, a number of you, Wally, a number of you know this, that I've been waiting for Captain America to finally get his third film, his third solo film, if you will, because Civil War is not a Captain America solo film as far as I'm concerned. Name only in that regard, but it's essentially Avengers 2.5. And I continue to believe that, and I continue to feel that way, and you know what? It's all subjective. You can agree or disagree with me as much as you like, but it was nice to see a solo Captain America effort. Even if it wasn't Steve Rogers in that regard, right? It's Sam Wilson, Anthony Mackie taking up the mantle in this particular film, and there's been a lot surrounding it as far as the subject matter, as far as the plot, as far as the castings, as far as the tone. But I saw a decent amount of people going into this one that said they did not have high expectations for it. I feel like Fantastic Four and even Thunderbolts, the other two MCU offerings this year, have some more hype behind it as far as the fans are concerned, right? A lot of people were not necessarily looking with very high expectations for this particular film, if you will. But expectations is definitely something that I want to talk about with respect to this film. Because, spoiler alert, and this is it. I do want to talk spoilers about this one. For this particular review, I don't know if I'm going to continue to do this going forward, but this particular review will be spoiler filled in that regard because there's some specific ideas, specific things that happen in this movie, specific references that are made that I do want to directly bring up now. And again, we can talk about it later as much as you guys want to talk about it in flight chat for sure next week. But still, there's some stuff that I want to get into here. But you know what? Let me begin with my high level thoughts on Captain America Brave New World. I liked it for what it was. Seriously, I did. Is it the best Marvel Cinematic Universe movie ever made? No, of course not. Is it even in the high tier of the MCU list as far as my MCU rankings are concerned? No, it's not in the high tier, but it's not in the low tier either. It's in the mid tier. It's absolutely in the mid tier. And you know what? I'd been talking for a while about how I was going to readjudicate and, actually put together an updated list of my Marvel Cinematic Universe rankings, and I actually have done that. And you know what? That's going to be the next piece of Patreon content, patreon.com/theflightcast. I'm going to do an episode where I reveal my MCU rankings, the films, okay, not the shows, because there's still a couple of shows that I haven't watched yet. And also, I almost feel like the shows really should be adjudicated differently, right? Trying to assess a 6 to 9 episode season of a show, juxtaposed with a film, that just does not seem fair. I feel like there should be a separate list of MCU films and MCU television in that regard as far as rankings are concerned, right? So I'm going to set that aside as far as the TV shows are concerned, but the movies, I've got all those ranked. I do. And as far as this movie's place is concerned, I can tell you that it sits firmly in the middle, the mid-tier of my MCU rankings. In fact, if I were to tell you the exact number place that it's in out of these 35 films, it's 20th. As far as my rankings are concerned, Captain America Brave New World is 20th in my MCU rankings. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with that. There's seriously nothing wrong with that. This is why I want to talk a little bit about expectations with respect to this particular film, because I feel like a lot of people, based on reactions that I've seen and heard, didn't level set themselves, or rather, didn't want to level set themselves as far as their expectations going into this film. Now, I did tell coworkers that based on what I saw in trailers and TV spots, that there might have been a sliver of potential for this to be on the level of Winter Soldier. Obviously, no. It is not on Winter Soldier's level. There's some things that it touches on. There's some things that it tries to do that just barely scratch the surface of something like Winter Soldier. But then they take turns towards Secret Invasion, and not in a bad way. Of course, you're talking to somebody that doesn't dislike or hate or categorically despise Secret Invasion. No, I had fun with Secret Invasion as well. Now, do I think this movie is better than Secret Invasion? Yes, I do. But I do think that there are, I went ahead and ranked one of the movies with one of the shows right off the bat. But I mean, just as far as perception, just as far as like how I look at the story and how I look at what goes on in this film, I didn't have like this incredible Infinity Saga level of expectations. And that's where the weird place that I think we're at with MCU movies right now. There have been so many of them. We're 35 movies in. I think there's a lot of fans that are still waiting for that next Avengers. They're still waiting for that next big hit, that was in the Infinity Saga. And which is funny because I look at my MCU tiers, and just as a brief teaser here for those of you who are subscribed to the Patreon, there's a good handful of Phase 4 and Phase 5 movies that are in my top tier, for sure. In fact, here, let me count real quickly. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 4 MCU films from Phase 4 and 5 that are in my top tier, the top 12, if you will, because right now it's a little uneven, right? Like there's 12 in the top tier, 12 in the mid tier, and then 11 in the low tier. Now, obviously, that'll get evened out, once we get to Thunderbolts, because that'll be movie 36. But then it'll go back to being uneven again once we get to Fantastic Four First Steps, because that will be movie 37. Either way, the fact of the matter is, when I look at all of the post-Infinity Saga films for the MCU, right, and we've talked about this, unless they're the huge team ups, right? Unless it's Deadpool and Wolverine, unless it's Spider-Man No Way Home, unless it's Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, the end of a trilogy, they just aren't regarded as, or the expectations aren't as high, and the fan hype is not as big for it because people keep waiting for every MCU movie to be this grand and glorious piece of a new puzzle, right? The next chapter for the MCU. And the fact of the matter is, this is not where we're at. This is not where the MCU is at. They've been doing this for so long that the idea is I think people are still waiting for them to recreate the Infinity Saga, and they're not going to. That was never necessarily their aim, and that's a lofty goal for them to live up to, right? I understand that it's Disney, I understand it's Marvel Studios, one of the biggest studios in the world, but to expect them to reach those heights, that level of hype consistently after they, did it and essentially blew their wad in 2019 with Avengers Endgame, I mean, I just don't think that's realistic. I really don't. So I didn't go into this expecting, oh my goodness, what an incredible reaching film. Wow, this is really going to set the tone and set the stage for the rest of the multiverse saga. No, of course not. I wasn't thinking that. I mean, I held out hope that it might be that, but here's the thing. I feel like a lot of times when we go into these movies, we are more concerned as fans about what we could have gotten and what we wanted to get instead of focusing on what we actually got. And this isn't just for Marvel. This is for Marvel. This is for DC. This is for any movie that has a massive fandom. Star Wars, Star Trek, whatever it is, right? You're more concerned as a fan about what you want to see and about what you hope to see rather than assessing what is actually there. And your expectations, your appraisal of the film is set upon those expectations. For me, did I wonder if Captain America Brave New World was going to be something that was going to, set the tone and pave the way for the rest of the multiverse saga? Yeah, I did wonder that. But when it became clear that the movie wasn't about that, I said, all right, let's see what this story is. And it's just a Cap story. That's all it is. It's just a standalone Captain America story. And I say standalone a little bit loosely here because it does heavily reference the past of the MCU, in particular, the Incredible Hulk. And maybe that's one of the things that I really do enjoy about it is because, for all the people that want to bash on the Incredible Hulk and talk about how it's one of the more forgettable Marvel movies ever made, yeah, it was the second one that came out. It came out in June of 2008, a month and a half after Iron Man. Okay, you want to give me this revisionist history? Look, the fact of the matter is when it made the money that it did, which, people now tout that as one of the lowest grossing MCU movies of all time. Yeah, they hadn't even hit the $1 billion mark yet, so those expectations were not placed upon that film. Enough of this revisionist history bullshit. Whatever. It is what it is. I actually like that movie, and the fact that this movie draws upon it so heavily, I mean, I just had to understand exactly the type of story that they were telling in this film. And once I realized that it was a personal story, that it was an individualized story that quite honestly could have been another Hulk movie, but it wasn't because of all the Universal stuff. So they said, all right, let's make it a Cap movie and go the other route, basically, building upon MCU history to tell this story. I said, okay, you know what? I will enjoy it for what it is. And there are a number of aspects of this film that I do enjoy, and you know what? You can attribute it to my wide strike zone. You can say, hey, Ray, you like everything, da-da-da-da. You know good and damn well that's not true. There's a reason that there's a low tier of the MCU, and you know what's at the bottom of that MCU list if you've listened to me long enough. Again, I'm teasing the Patreon because I really do want to go over this list. I'm looking at it right now, and I think it could be very interesting to see people's opinions with respect to my MCU rankings. But as far as Brave New World goes, I did not regret it. My streak is intact. I've now seen all 35 MCU films at the theater. I have not missed a single one with respect to seeing them at the theater, right? Like I've watched all these movies in theatrical presentation, including the ones in 2021 when, theaters weren't even fully open thanks to COVID-19. So yeah, I like maintaining my streak, and this is not one, I did not have the same feeling that I had, coming out of, say, Thor Love and Thunder or Guardians Volume 2. No, I absolutely feel like this is a solid mid-tier Marvel Cinematic Universe film, and I have no issues with it. I really don't. I don't have a problem with it because my expectations weren't so astronomically high, like, oh my goodness, we've got to hold Marvel's feet to the fire. No, and that's where it's weird that we've come full circle on this because, it used to be that Marvel would get all the praise and DC would get all the bashing, right? And Marvel was this gold standard that everybody else was held to. DC especially was held to. Oh, why can't you be more like Captain America Civil War? Why can't you be more like Avengers Endgame? Da 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 da, this and that, right? Like that was the standard, and it was. I mean, the Marvel fan base had such a huge ego over this, and over the last year or so, their ego's been cut down to size because that piece about is the Marvel Cinematic Universe failing or whatever it was. I forget what the title was. We talked about it about a year or so ago. And all of the negative press. I mean, the fact that this movie is getting mixed reviews, and the Marvels didn't get reviewed very well. Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania didn't get reviewed very well. No, it's been a struggle, if you will, for the MCU comparative to the success, the unbridled success that they had during the Infinity Saga, right? For most other franchises, this really wouldn't be that big of a deal, but for Marvel, it's a massive deal. Oh my goodness, right? And so now their fans are kind of caught in a similar position that DC fans were caught in during the middle of the DCEU, if you will, the beginning, and certainly in the middle. After the whole Justice League disaster and whatnot. And I've seen posts on Blue Sky, people talking about ignore the reviews, don't listen to the critics, blah, blah. I'm hearing people say that now. That's become a regular thing that Marvel fans have said about MCU films. Don't listen to the critics. Don't mind Rotten Tomatoes. Just go in with an open mind. The same shit that we told them for years to do about the DCEU, and they didn't listen to us. Now the tables have turned, and they're saying that about the MCU. It's intriguing. It really is intriguing. But you know what? I will defend them on this one because I've always said from the beginning that I enjoy both franchises and I really don't discriminate, even though I have a preference for DC. I clearly still enjoy the MCU films, and when it comes to their mid-tier offerings like Brave New World, there is a lot of things that I do happen to like about the film. Starting with the cast. This is Anthony Mackie's first turn cinematically as Captain America, Sam Wilson, Captain America in that regard, right? And the one thing that I have said, when it comes to any like prerequisites, because that's always a question. You get 35 movies and several TV shows deep into a cinematic universe like this, and the homework problem definitely rears its ugly head. And I will say that for full context for this film, Incredible Hulk definitely, yes, is probably a film that you should watch, if you haven't seen it, because if you want full context, I don't feel like this is a film where like, well, if you haven't seen this and this and that, then you won't get it. No, you'll get what's happening. It's just, if you want full context, Incredible Hulk, and also the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, because that was the transition of Steve Rogers to Sam Wilson as far as the Captain America mantle is concerned, right? And he was working through it. It was between him and Bucky, and then he finally got it at the end of the show. And now this is his first feature film as Captain America. And I had no issues with it. Can Anthony Mackie lead a movie by himself? Well, sure, in this universe, why not? Come on, this is the same universe that has given us an Ant-Man trilogy, a Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy, 4 Thor movies. What, did Anthony Mackie can't handle being Captain America on his own? Yeah, he was fine. He was perfectly fine. I didn't need him to be Steve Rogers. I didn't need him to be larger than life. I needed him to be him. And I didn't see anything as far as his performance as Sam Wilson in this movie that betrayed any of his prior performances, whether it was in Winter Soldier or in the Avengers films or Avengers 2.5, otherwise known as Civil War, or the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. And there are threads and there are characters from the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, like Isaiah Bradley, that are carried over into this movie. Carl Lumbly as Isaiah Bradley, nice to see him again. Carl Lumbly is a vet when it comes to this type of stuff. It's nice to see him back again and to see some of those threads, brought back from the show a little bit into this film, not a ton. I'll talk about that in a little bit here with respect to the writing. But yeah, I had no complaints about either one of them in the film whatsoever. I didn't have any complaints about Danny Ramirez playing Joaquin Torres. Clearly, there's a comic book, a connection, if you will, as far as him being Falcon. Apparently, he's transformed, like he's made into a mutant, or at least he has superhuman abilities. Transformed into a bird-like creature, I guess, according to the wiki, right? So this is obviously not going that route, but again, it's the MCU. The MCU has taken liberties with the source material for the better part of 17 years. we should not expect any different with respect to this film. And that most certainly doubly goes for Shira Haas's character, Ruth Bat Saraf. Now, we'd heard about this, and I haven't seen, have I seen anything that Shira Haas has been in? Hang on. She doesn't have a large, like, filmography. No, I've seen none of these movies. I've seen, and none of the TV shows that she has been in. Shira Haas, she's an Israeli actress, and there was controversy because she was cast as a character named Sabra in this particular story, but they didn't make her Israeli. What they actually did was they made her a former widow, right? And they brought up the red room. The red room. Torres says that, so that's one of the things where it's like, okay. And I read an article that suggested that maybe they made that change and made her a former widow because they wanted to get away from the whole controversy with respect to the character being Israeli. And it's like, no, the creators, Julia Sona, the director, and the others were saying, no, it's because we were trying to fit her into the MCU mythology. And to me, that makes sense because I've seen Black Widow. I like Black Widow. And if you want to tell me that this person that is protecting Thunderbolt Ross is a former Red Room, like, student, if you will, or trainee, whatever you want to call it, a former widow, yeah, okay, I get that. I totally buy that. I'm perfectly fine with that. That's the thing, is like, the MCU has its own mythology, and it's not the same as the comics. It is its own cinematic mythology. It's its own cinematic Earth, if you will. So, with that in mind, you gotta treat all the entries based on that mythology, right? Never mind the comic book accuracy, never mind what this character did here, what that character did there on the page. We've had nearly 17 years of this mythology, so if you're somebody that has watched all of it like I have, you'll appreciate those threads. When I heard Red Room, I knew what Joaquin was talking about, right? Just like all the references to Incredible Hulk, I know what they're talking about. I get it, right? Like, the connections are made. That's where we're at now with respect to the MCU, where yeah, the homework problem is definitely there. But if they're going to reference things from the past, it's like, okay, did you see it? Well, if you didn't see it, but you're interested, okay, you can go to Disney Plus and watch it here, or you can, buy it digitally on VOD or whatever there, right? I didn't have an issue with that. I really didn't. I mean, her character, they didn't go into a great amount of depth with respect to what she was doing or like how she was operating, but I mean, she's clearly there to be, at first, like, a red herring, if you will, for the villainy in the film, and then it turns out, no, she's actually, like, on the right side and she's going to help them. So it's a flip turn. It's one of those types of characters, if you will. I wasn't bothered by it. I really wasn't. I mean, it's one note in many ways, similar to how I feel like the widows were portrayed in Black Widow in that regard. Anybody except, Natasha or Yelena in that regard. But, she played her role, and I didn't have any issues with necessarily how her role was played in this particular film, as far as the way that it went, to be honest with you. It's not like, oh my goodness, they could have done so much more with it. Yeah, maybe they could have, but that was not their choice in that regard. So, I'll live with that. I'm okay with that, right? And then with respect to, I guess, the other two big members of this cast, if you will, definitely Harrison Ford playing Thaddeus Ross, and he's the centerpiece of this film, most certainly. And, this is a tricky one because this is like Richard Harris / Michael Gambon territory, in the sense that Harrison Ford is, from Harry Potter. I'm referencing those other two actors because Harrison Ford is taking over for the deceased William Hurt, right? And it's doubly tough because William Hurt played Thunderbolt Ross in two different movies, right? He played in Incredible Hulk, and then a number of movies later in Captain America Civil War, and then reappeared again for a little bit of a cameo in Infinity War, right? So, and we know about the Sokovia Accords, and there's stuff going on there, but the idea is that we're supposed to buy that Harrison Ford is the same person that William Hurt played. And that can be tough when you decide to replace one high-profile actor with a higher-profile actor, because with all due respect to William Hurt, may he rest in peace, Harrison Ford, higher caliber actor. Yes, all seriously, like that's come on. That Han Solo, Indiana Jones, right? Come on now, like seriously, like we're not. Subjectively speaking, we're not going to debate that. At least I'm not going to debate that. So That's a tough one. This is why I say, a lot of times when, they're going to cast a particular character that, is well steeped in fan lore, like a Captain Kirk or something like that, go with an unknown, right? I remember years ago when they talked about casting Matt Damon as Captain Kirk in the Kelvin timeline, and I was like, no, he's too big of a name. We're going to have Matt Damon on the brain every time, we're just going to be thinking he's doing a William Shatner impersonation. No, you had to get an unknown in there, an unknown at the time, like Chris Pine, and that would have made it work better. Now, all that being said, Harrison Ford does what he does. Harrison Ford is who he is. Seriously, there were some hints of Air Force One. There were some hints of Indiana Jones, Han Solo. I mean, he's Harrison Ford. Like, seriously, he's one of the stronger character actors out there. Has made an incredible career at it. This is his first turn in the MCU, and what complaints do I have about Harrison Ford being in this film? No, I think he definitely gave a range and a depth that I'm not going to say William Hurt couldn't have done that was if he were still here, but I certainly think that Harrison Ford did everything he could with respect to the range and depth that they gave Thaddeus Ross and his, emotional machinations, if you will, right? But it does require you to, have an understanding of the character prior to this film, which again just rears the homework problem, rears that ugly head again, if you will, ugly or not, depending on how steeped into the lore you are. But no, no complaints about Harrison Ford. I also don't have any complaints about Tim Blake Nelson playing Samuel Stearns, aka the leader. And I knew that, like, when Incredible Hulk first came out, and all my Marvel friends were like, he's supposed to be the leader, da 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 da. And his character, what he reminds me of? I will connect him to a DC reference. He's basically Marvel's The Thinker, right? At least that's what I got. The DeVoe, The Thinker. That's what I thought of. Brent, if you're listening to this, you'll appreciate this. Season 4 of The Flash, right? I thought of that. I thought of that characterization of The Thinker when looking at how Tim Blake Nelson is playing the leader here in that regard, with all the calculations and, I'm going to do this and I'm going to figure that out. I'm going to be this many steps ahead. Not quite as manipulative. I mean, close. Close. He really tries to be very manipulative. But no, I didn't have any issues with how Tim Blake Nelson played this character, and he's absolutely a veteran at this point. I mean, obviously, this is his, second major appearance in the MCU since The Incredible Hulk. But, he was in Watchmen, the HBO TV series, the limited series with Regina King and Don Johnson and many others, right? So, like, he's no stranger to the comic book genre, the comic book motion picture slash, television genre, if you will. So I had no issues with him or his design and how he played the character. He was a sinister villain. He was. Most certainly he was. There wasn't necessarily a ton of development with respect to it. I wouldn't call him one of the greatest Marvel villains, but I do think I would put him, I wouldn't put him in the villain problem category, right? I wouldn't put him on the same level as, Mads Mikkelsen as Caecilius in Doctor Strange, or, what's his name? Christopher Eccleston in as Malekith the Accursed in Thor the Dark World. No, I would not put Samuel Stearns. I would not put Tim Blake Nelson on that character and in that characterization. I would put him higher than that. Not massively high. He's not like Thanos or Killmonger level. No, certainly not. But he is definitely a mid-tier villain. Again, mid-tier. Mid-tier is like the biggest thing that I can say for this film, positive or negative in that regard. And with respect to a couple more castings, this is definitely spoiler filled in this regard. It was cool to see the castings, to see Sebastian Stan and to see Liv Tyler, reprise their roles. I wasn't sure if Liv Tyler was going to come back. And I read this IGN piece where they were talking about how, that looks iffy, that, I don't know if she was actually there. It looks like it's CGI. And it's like, okay, I realize that, we have call to like question Marvel's, and Disney's like process when it comes to post production and whatnot. But I why are we thinking about it that hard? Why? If Liv Tyler is actually there, we see Liv Tyler, we hear her voice, then she was there. Whether she was in a green room the whole time and wasn't actually on the raft talking to her father, whatever, I don't care. She's there in that regard, right? And again, it was cool when Bucky showed up. The point of the movie where Bucky shows up, there was a woman in my theater that did audibly gasp and like applaud when he showed up. So, real big Bucky fan, real big Sebastian Stan fan in that regard. But again, cool connective tissue that like goes back to, the history of the MCU, if you will. I didn't have any issues with it whatsoever. With respect to the writing of this film, again, mid tier, which I guess I'm okay with. A lot of people apparently, I guess, are not okay with it, and I did see a little bit of what Dave, the film junkie, was saying with respect to seeing the seams when it comes to the edit and the post production process. I guess one of the crew members of the movie like went to did an interview with Vulture and talked about like how they changed a lot of stuff at the last minute and there were rewrites and this happened and that happened, and how come Marvel keeps doing this, and why do they keep messing with their movies like this. Look, that's part of their process, guys. It's been a number of years, and I think that's just something we have to accept, truthfully. And I'll go into later why it's not as big of a deal, at least to the general audience, as you might think it is. But the reality of the situation is this is what Marvel does. If those stories are indeed true, and of course I'm inclined to believe that they're true, but to me, once I got past the fact that this wasn't an overarching huge story, that had major implications for the multiverse saga, and that this was just a personal story about Ross and Stearns. Once I got past it, once I understood that that's what it was, I was like, all right, I will treat this as the Captain America Sam Wilson standalone that it is. He's caught in the middle of some real like issues, some real baggage between Ross and Stearns, and it's like, all right, that's the type of story this is. That's the type of movie this is. That's the direction they decided to go in. Okay, and it's funny because I went through all the main castings and I didn't mention Giancarlo Esposito, who plays Sidewinder in this movie, and that's because he's not the main villain. Like, he's really an antagonist in this film, and like for me, it's like, okay, I'm good with that because one, it means that he might show up later, which I'm perfectly okay with seeing more Giancarlo Esposito in my franchises. I don't have a problem with that whatsoever, right? And two, I didn't need him to be the big bad. All these fan expectations, right? Oh, he might be Magneto. He might be this character. He might be that character. It's like, can we? No, we can't. Fans cannot put aside their expectations. So when it comes to like, how this story was put together and what the story ended up being, that's where I feel like a lot of the disappointment comes into play, right? Because I've seen, sterilized, boring, safe, right? They didn't go as far as they could. And look, if you want me, subjectively speaking, to talk about how far they could have gone with the subject matter, yeah, I'll tell you. This movie doesn't go as far as The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. The show, that is. It certainly doesn't go as far as Captain America, the Winter Soldier is, with respect to the story and with respect to the characterizations, right? There's all the racial undertones in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, all of the government overreach and all of the political stuff that we saw in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier and also in Captain America, the Winter Soldier. No, this does not follow that. It doesn't. It doesn't even have the same political subtext as Captain America, the First Avenger, and probably not as much as Civil War, even though Civil War, those politics get real muddied compared to those other films, to be honest with you. No, this is very much its own telling, its own like different type of story, right? And it's not like Cap can't have these types of stories, right? It's weird because I really do feel like I'm defending this film, and I don't need to defend it. If you don't like it, that's your business. It's all subjective. But for me, I didn't need this to be some grand and glorious piece of fiction like I feel Winter Soldier is, or like how I enjoyed First Avenger in that regard, right? I didn't even need it to be as big and sprawling as Civil War really attempted to be. No, I didn't need all of that. I was fine with this being a personal story about Ross and Stearns with Sam Wilson caught in the middle. I was perfectly okay with that. And the references they made to the Sokovia Accords and how he hounded Sam and the issues that they had with each other, I was okay with that. This was a surface level story. It is. It's a surface level story. It's not meant to be on the same level as Infinity War or Winter Soldier or any of the top tier MCU films. It's also not nearly, to the level of Thor Love and Thunder and some of the films in the low tier, as far as I'm concerned. No, it's staunchly mid tier. And I'm okay with that. 35 movies in, I'm okay with that. Seriously. Because every once in a while, you get a Spider-Man No Way Home, you get a Deadpool and Wolverine, you get a Guardians Volume 3. Okay, cool. I'm great with those. And then in between, you get some stuff that's still enjoyable to watch for 2 hours, right? I don't need it to be this incredible sprawling epic. I don't need it to be so, like, in-depth and all this. I don't need that. I don't need that all the damn time. And it's not to expect Marvel to give that to you all the damn time, especially when they've been at this breakneck pace for the last 17 years with respect to putting out movies, I don't think that's realistic. I don't. Regardless of how egotistical the fan base has gotten and how much they threw it in our faces as DC fans during the throes of the DCEU, it's still not realistic, right? I'm not going to go to their level. I'm not going to stoop to that level with that regard, right? So to me, you know, was I bothered by the story of this film? No, I know it's a bit more basic. I know that it's not as complex, but I'm all right with that. I have no issues with respect to that. It is what it is. It's a standard, basic, largely standalone Captain America story, right? And you might think of me using the word basic as, well, that's clearly an indictment on the film. It's not by my hand. You can treat it as an indictment all you want. I still enjoyed that movie more than you did if you think basic is an insult with respect to it. So I was fine with it, for what it was. It wasn't anything to write home about, but it wasn't anything that was just like, oh my goodness, how terrible, in that regard. And visually speaking, I think I could say that the visuals in this film match the rest of the MCU, to be honest with you. I mean, they're not weak visuals in that regard in terms of what we're used to seeing from the MCU. It's just that we don't have like the massive helicarrier set piece like we did in Winter Soldier. We don't have the Sokovia, like that whole slog and the destruction of it like we had in Age of Ultron. We don't have anything near the third act of Endgame or Infinity War, but again, we're not supposed to. It's a personal story, it's an individualized story that even though the collateral damage involves millions, it's really only about 3 or 4 people in that regard. So that means that the fight sequences and the visual effects are going to be toned down as well, but they still look good right now. In that regard, like, again, I'm comparing this, I'm making another comparison to Secret Invasion. No, this is better. This is definitely better, I would say, subjectively speaking, visually, than Secret Invasion in that regard. The effects with what they did with Sam's suit. I like his suit, the way that they adapted it. I wasn't that. I mean, his suit was cool at the end of the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, but I wanted them to slim it down, and they did. They most certainly slimmed it down, and they definitely gave him the Captain America, designs and flair, if you will, with respect to how it's put together. It's very clear where it comes from in terms of its origins. It's a blend of what we saw at the end of the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and also with respect to the, like what we saw in Steve Rogers' designs, his costume designs, in the throes of the Avengers, in the heyday of the Avengers, if you will, right? And I liked it, truthfully. I liked all of his costume designs. I liked the moves that he had as Falcon, some of the stuff that he was doing, some of the stuff that both he and Torres were doing, the current Falcon, if you will. Yeah, I didn't have any complaints with respect to that. And I also didn't have any complaints with Red Hulk. I thought Red Hulk, they've gotten better. Okay, we've had a debate, if you will. There's been a debate with respect to how the Hulk design has evolved over time, right? And, why did he look better in the earlier films than he does in this film, right? Do I feel, like as far as the Hulk design, and mind you, I haven't seen She-Hulk, but that's probably not going to, change my mind at all. But do I feel that, Mark Ruffalo's Hulk looked better in the Avengers than he did in Avengers Endgame? Yes, I do. I do agree with that. Most certainly I do. I think that this Red Hulk is stronger than that, right? I mean, clearly you see Harrison Ford, you see the hair, and you see the face and everything going on there. And yes, like the monster come out to play, and I have no idea what the actual origins of Red Hulk are, or how Ross becomes him, or whatever it is. It doesn't matter, because again, this is MCU mythology, and they have changed the mythology to suit their own efforts and to suit their own universe many times already. This is no different. This should be treated as no different as far as I'm concerned. But as far as the design of the Red Hulk, in relation to Harrison Ford, I had no complaints. I really didn't. And the destruction effects, especially the stuff they did around Washington D.C. in particular, I thought looked gorgeous. Like as far as like they did a really good job. They did a good job visually. I really don't have any visual complaints here, right? None like we've had in the past with some of the other MCU films like Black Panther and the like. The visual effects in this film were solid. They were on point. They absolutely were on point. And I don't have any issues necessarily with how Julius Ona I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, Julius Ona, the director, and also Kramer Morgenthau. What else has Kramer Morgenthau done? Kramer Morgenthau, okay, 6-time Emmy nominee. Uh, he's done episodes of Game of Thrones, Boardwalk Empire, Fahrenheit 451. Thor: The Dark World. Okay, all right. So he did shoot. Was he the DP on Thor: The Dark World? Yes, he was. Okay, so he's no stranger to the MCU, and maybe that's another reason why I dig this movie, because I like Thor: The Dark World. I do. For all the issues that film has, and again, mid tier. I keep saying mid tier. I've said mid tier like 50 times already in this review. I'm going to keep saying that mid tier. Mid tier with respect to that, which is funny considering, how I feel about Thor the Dark World, and how I may have it listed elsewhere, if you will. But still, yeah, I didn't have any issues. Nothing that stood out to me visually where it's like, oh my goodness, that was terrible, or this was off, or that was off. No, it is what it is. And the editing, like I said, Dave talking earlier on his Patreon over at Film Junkie about how he could see the seams, and where the edits and the cuts were. Here's the thing. I will say this, that I'm one of those people that I don't go into a film looking for that stuff, and I'm not necessarily saying that he or others do, but for me, like, if I'm involved in the story, if I'm curious in the story, the story is where it starts for me. If that ropes me in, and if I'm curious about those aspects, then there's a lot of these other edits and a lot of these other cuts that I will either ignore or dismiss, if you will. So to me, whether or not there was another project in here that got cut out at the last second, I can't judge that. I got to judge this for what it actually is, right? Unless we get another situation like BVS or Justice League, where it's like, well, clearly changes were made to suit this, and this isn't what the original intent was, yada yada. If Julius Ono comes out and says that, well, then that would obviously change things. But for right now, I have to take it on his word and on others' words that this is, what he intended to put out there. And I haven't seen any of his particular films. He directed The Girl Is in Trouble, The Cloverfield Paradox, uh, Luce or Lucy, whatever it is, with Naomi Watts, Octavia Spencer, Kelvin Harrison Jr., and Tim Roth. I haven't seen that. This is his fourth film fourth feature film that he has directed, and he's a Nigerian American filmmaker. So hey, representation matters. Absolutely gonna salute that, no doubt about it. I think this is solid. I think this is a solid entry, and oh my goodness, he's younger than me. Okay, so he's younger than me by about a year, and he has directed a Marvel Cinematic Universe film. Okay, well, you know what? Salute to you, Julius Ona. I really didn't have any complaints visually speaking with respect to your good film here. I do most certainly want to talk about the score here for a second for this film, because I actually really dug it. Like, there were pieces in this movie that, like, for some reason, the best way that I can approximate it is it reminded me of Junkie XL, Tom Holkenborg's score for Tomb Raider, where it was just like, it's this weird amalgamation of like old school, like, like brassy, like, bombastic themes merged with the new school, the Zimmer school, if you will, right? The Williams school merging with the Zimmer school of, matching, what you see on screen and being in the background and just supporting what's going on, but also heightening the tension at certain times, if you will, in that regard. And that's really what I heard in this particular score. There was a lot of brass and there was a lot of like fanfares that I really, really liked in this score. And I am not familiar with this composer, Laura Cartman, who has done music for film, TV, video games, theater, and concert hall. She's won 5 Emmys, trained at Juilliard, where she played jazz by day and honed her skills scatting in bars at night. That's probably why I dig it, because there is, a little bit of like orchestral jazz in a decent amount of the score for this film, and I really did like it. The score for this movie is probably one of my favorite parts of the film, to be honest with you, because it really like gave this kind of like a larger than life scale, if you will. And sometimes music can be overbearing with respect to that. And there may have been a couple of cases where perhaps it was a little loud. I mean, not too loud, to be honest with you. I felt like it mixed pretty well with the audio as far as like us seeing this in the theater. But I liked the punctuation and the brass and the orchestrations that she had in this particular film, as far as the tone that they were going for. It's a very, not surrealistic, but, kind of like a stately tone, if you will. Like there's always this, it's not the same as what Silvestri did with Captain America: The First Avenger. It's a little like Henry Jackman. In fact, it does draw some comparisons. And she did, I feel like she built on, I guess, what both Silvestri and Henry Jackman, the composer for Winter Soldier and Civil War, did. And also he composed The Falcon and the Winter Soldier as well. She kind of blends both styles, but makes something of her own out of it, is the best way that I could describe it. I really liked it. I really thought this was cool. Oh, this is awesome. At the University of Michigan, she graduated magna cum laude with a Bachelor of Music degree, studying with William Balcom and Leslie Bassett. Received both her doctorate and master's in music composition at the Juilliard School. Okay, so she did her undergrad work in Michigan. That's awesome. She's a Wolverine. Go blue. Fantastic. Love that. No, I really liked it. I really, really liked the score for this. And, I have no idea, as I look at the rest of her work, what else of hers that she's done that I've seen, to be honest with you. Her major filmography starts in 1999. I haven't seen any of these earlier films of hers, like The Cinema Travelers or Set It Up. If we get closer here, oh wait, The Marvels? She did the Marvel score? Is that her? Well, what do you know? That is indeed her. I must have mentioned that in the review. Truthfully, I honestly don't remember that from over a year ago. But she did The Marvels. She did American Fiction, which I still need to see. That is definitely on the list of movies to see for sure. And as far as TV is concerned, she composed the score for Underground, which was the WGN series created by Misha Green that I think Journey Smollett was involved in, about the Underground Railroad. She also did 13 episodes of LA's Finest, which was the Gabrielle Union and Jessica Alba show that was a spinoff out of Bad Boys. She also, wait a minute, Lovecraft Country. Oh my goodness. How have I not? Okay, no, clearly I've known this composer. I don't know what. Wow. This is how you know there's too much shit to watch. Because Lovecraft Country, I've obviously seen. I've reviewed it on my show. I've obviously seen The Marvels and reviewed it on my show. I don't remember that she did these. Wow. Okay. So they're actually, I actually am familiar with a decent amount of her work. Not all of her work. Well, you know what? Job well done. I have no complaints whatsoever. Laura Cartman, excellent work. Seriously. Well, what do you know? That just tells you, like, especially like as you get older, like, there's only so much you can remember, and I remember a lot of things, but that one I don't remember in particular. I will remember it now. I will completely remember Laura Cartman going forward. She definitely seems to have made her mark in the MCU and as a television composer as well. So yeah, I really like the score for this particular film, for Brave New World. Kudos to Laura Cartman for that. So overall, guys, yeah, I dug Captain America: Brave New World. It's a solid mid-tier MCU film, to be honest with you. I didn't regret seeing it. I didn't regret, paying money at the theater to see it. I don't hold it in this incredibly high regard, but I also don't hate it either. And I'm not going to sit here and be like, well, Marvel needs to do better. No, Marvel is fine with respect to this, seriously, and I'll tell you how fine they are, because all the complaints that, any fans might have with respect to the subjective quality of this film are clearly not echoed by the general audience. Now, yes, the budget for this film was $180 million reportedly as far as the production budget. And yes, we're still mentioning marketing budgets and all this other shit that, wasn't a thing until BVS, right? As far as our discussion/arguments were concerned. But the movie took in $192.4 million in the opening weekend box office. So it's already made back its production budget in the first 3 days. So what does that tell you? It tells you the general audience really doesn't give a shit. Really does not care about how, the seeing the seams in the story or the editing, and like whether the story was strong enough and whether this was this and that was that. That their expectations were met because they were entertained, I would say. And I've tried to say that about the general audience, right? They do not care nearly as much about comic accuracy, about all the other little in-between things with respect to filmmaking and editing and writing that we care about. They just don't. And look, this is all the more proof, right? For all the mid-tier, and I'll go to the Hell site, What is it on the hell site? You know what the hell site is, RottenTomatoes.com, that bane of our existence as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, look at this. 51% rotten by the critics, 80% fresh by the audience, right? So here we have yet another rotten Marvel film, right? And of course that doesn't mean shit, except to the people who hold Rotten Tomatoes in high regard, right? But this whole like the critics are just, they're treating it like the DCEU now. They really are. They're being overly critical and they're saying this is hackneyed and that's lazy and this is overstuffed and that's ridiculous. Da 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 da. Right? But you look at the audience, and the audience is just like, I had fun watching it. It was a fun time. I enjoyed watching it, and that's really all that matters. Did you enjoy watching it? Now, if you didn't, hey, you know what? That's your business. But all I will tell you is that anybody proclaiming death in the MCU, yeah, those reports are greatly exaggerated. This certainly is not death. Making nearly 200 million in your opening weekend, yeah, that is not death. Not by any stretch of the imagination. And we'll see how far it goes. I'm not saying that Brave New World is going to be one of the highest grossing Marvel movies of all time. Most certainly not. But it's certainly not going to be a bomb. It's not going to be a failure in that regard, right? Like, it's already outperforming the Marvels and Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania as far as recent Marvel Cinematic Universe films are concerned. So there you have it. That just further shows you the divide between what fans think and what the general audience thinks. And remember, we as fans, 5 to 10% of the total audience if we are lucky. That 90 to 95%, they're the ones largely responsible for that 192.8 million in its opening weekend. They're the ones that saw that movie and gave it the 80% fresh rating on the popcorn meter. Ugh, stupid Rotten Tomatoes, right? So, I'm just putting that into perspective here for people that want to, complain about this particular film. You're within your right to. It's all subjective. You most certainly can feel however you want with respect to the MCU, but I think it's crazy where we're at right now, where I, of all people, after dealing with all the pretentiousness and all the arrogance from MCU fans for years over what DC was putting out, now I'm the one coming to their defense. I'm the one saying, hey, screw the critics. Screw it. But it's the same thing I said before. Never mind the critics. Whether it was a good movie or whether it was a bad movie, make your own choices, right? So, you know what? I feel like I've been rationally balanced. All things perfectly balanced, if you will, with respect to my perspective on that. There's two other things that I want to talk about that are definitely spoiler involved before I finish this particular review. And that is the end credit scene and how that's not nearly as big of a deal as the other thing that this movie introduced. Now, first of all, with respect to the end credit scene, I saw it on Reddit, specifically in the Snyder Cut Reddit, which, yes, I know, probably is a very toxic place, all things considered. But in the Snyder Cut Reddit, somebody posted that the end credit scene of Brave New World was a direct ripoff of BVS. And I didn't watch the clip. Somebody had already gotten like a camcorder dub leak of it and had it a spoiler tag over it. I did not watch it because I didn't want to see it. But I had that in the back of my head, so I was waiting for it. And yeah, I see what they're saying. Spoilers, of course, as I've warned before, this is a spoiler-filled review. He's saying that the conversation between Sam Wilson, Captain America, and the leader in the Raft prison is identical to Batman talking to Lex Luthor in prison at the end of BVS. And you know what? I will say that aesthetically speaking, in terms of lighting and in terms of how it was angled and in terms of how it was shot and in terms of the implications of what was said, yeah, I do get it. I do get where he's saying. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Julius Ona did that on purpose. I'm not going to say that. I am going to say I could see where somebody, subjectively speaking, would draw those comparisons. I'm sure Brent thinks I'm out of my mind for that. But no, I think if you were to line it up, and I'm sure somebody has at this point, you could see similarities in that. That being said, I don't think the scene's a big deal. And I basically, it's the leader warning Sam about the multiverse and about others from the multiverse coming, right? It's supposed to be a big multiverse tease, if you will. But to me, wasn't really that big of a tease. I mean, we already know about the multiverse saga and how that's going. I mean, if that's meant to wet the whistle of the general audience, okay, maybe it does. But as far as us fans, it really doesn't, cut a whole lot of ice with us. No, for me, the bigger thing that was introduced into this film is that little metallic substance starting with an A that apparently, oh, and I forgot, this movie also directly references Eternals, right? Because remember how we all had those conversations about Are they ever going to mention the fact that there's just a giant celestial sticking up out of the ground? Well, yes, they do. It's called Celestial Island, and it's what Japan and the US and the other countries were fighting over. And apparently, it's full of adamantium. Yeah, adamantium introduced into the MCU. And to that, I say this: Marvel Studios, Kevin Feige, Louis D'Esposito, anybody else involved, even Bob Iger, stop toying with me. Okay? Knock this shit off. You know what you're doing. You absolutely, positively know what you're doing. Adamantium? Really? You're going to introduce that element, right? And you're going to talk about how it's even stronger than vibranium and the possibilities are limitless. Really? Gee, I wonder what adamantium could possibly be used for. Perhaps so, I don't know, metallic claws? Here's the deal, Marvel Studios. If you're going to introduce that into your franchise, finally, you better pay that shit off soon. This is me being the impatient fan talking. You know what I'm waiting for. You know what I'm looking for. Everybody else, mostly everybody else, excited about Fantastic Four First Steps because they're excited about getting potentially the best Fantastic Four movie that we've gotten, since the other three have been controversial to, outright sucking, subjectively speaking, in that regard. You know what? That's fine and dandy. Fantastic Four fans can wait for that. Anybody that's excited to see RDJ come back as Doctor Doom, that's fine and dandy. Great. Be excited for that. You know what I'm waiting for. I want my uncanny X-Men. And you keep teasing me with them, right? You put Beast in an end credit scene in the Marvels, right? And it was Kelsey Grammer's Beast, right? Okay. And now you're giving me adamantium. Adamantium is in the MCU. Knock it off. If you're not going to play this out soon, knock it off. That's all I have to say. Right, I posted that on Blue Sky. That was just like, oh, what a tease. What an absolute tease, if you will. Nerd balls. That's what I'm going to call it. Nerd balls. That's what it's giving me. Okay? Seriously. That's what you're doing. I don't know if anybody has come up with that phrase or not, but I'm coining it myself right here. Nerd balls. Stop it. Knock it off. Give me my X-Men. You've introduced the element. Okay? The literal the material that makes up Wolverine's claws is in the MCU. To me, that is a way bigger deal than anything with the Multiverse Saga or anything with Doctor Doom. That is my personal expectation, and that is me going, cut it out, unless you're going to pay it off real soon. And I know it's not going to be real soon. I know it's going to be years. I know I'm going to have to wait, and I'm going to be impatient. That's the one thing I'm impatiently waiting for from the MCU. My flippin' uncanny X-Men. All right. It's okay. It's all right. We all have our cross to bear. We all have our stresses. We all have our impatience. That's my impatience. You know, all the people that are impatient for the Batman Part 2, I'm patient because we have a ton of Batman content. Guess what we don't have a whole lot more of anymore? X-Men content. I can't always go back to Fox X-Men. Yes, it's there, but I want to see what they do in the MCU. I want to see how they fit into this world since you finally have the ability to do so. Okay? So, that's where I'm at with respect to that. It's all subjective, of course, but adamantium in the flippin' MCU. All right, there you have it. Those are my thoughts in a nutshell with respect to Captain America Brave New World. A fun time that I personally had, subjectively speaking, at the theater. Hopefully you did as well, provided you went and saw it. Hopefully you did, because like I said, this is a spoiler-filled review if you're listening to this right now. And that will do it for this particular episode of Flight Review. Thank you so much for listening to me. Thank you so much for supporting the Flightcast, if you will. Hopefully, like I said, you enjoyed Captain America Brave New World. If you did not, sorry that you did not enjoy it, but I personally had fun with it myself. If you have any thoughts with respect to any of the spoilers that I talked about or any of the stuff that I talked about, my thoughts on the movie in general that you want to share and, engage in the discussion on Flight Chat, for those of you who haven't emailed already, you know where to find me on Blue Sky at Flightcast. There's also the Flightcast Facebook page. And of course, I can be reached by email at ray@theflightcast.com. I look forward to talking about this one, and what your thoughts are with respect to this film and the future of the MCU before we get to Thunderbolts here in a couple of months. But until then, take care, stay safe out there, and I will see you all next time. Take it easy.